I'm Maya, 28 years old, and I never imagined I'd find myself standing in the marble foyer of the Blackstone Foundation Gala, watching my sister Sophia's face turn ashen as she recognized the man beside me. 10 years earlier, she had destroyed my senior prom by stealing Tyler, the boy I'd been dating for 8 months. But as she stood frozen near the champagne fountain, her eyes locked on my husband Alexander. Her perfectly manicured hand trembled, causing her wine glass to slip and shatter against the polished floor. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The sharp crack of crystal echoed through the opulent ballroom, drawing curious glances from Chicago's elite. Just like that sound, my world had shattered a decade ago when I discovered the depth of my sister's betrayal. But tonight, as I watched Sophia struggle to compose herself while staring at Alexander Blackstone, I realized that sometimes the most devastating losses lead to the most unexpected victories. Growing up in the affluent suburb of Lake Forest, Illinois, the dynamic between Sophia and me was established before we could even walk. Our sprawling Tudor mansion on Sheridan Road housed a family where success was measured in achievements, appearances, and social connections. I was the elder daughter by 18 months, inheriting our father's analytical mind and our grandmother's strong jaw. Sophia arrived with our mother's ethereal beauty and an innate ability to command attention simply by entering a room. The contrast between us became more pronounced with each passing year. While I spent afternoons buried in advanced mathematics, textbooks, or perfecting my debate arguments, Sophia effortlessly collected admirers at the country club tennis courts. My Saturday mornings were devoted to SAT prep courses and volunteer work at the Children's Hospital, while Sophia held court at the local boutiques, her natural style making her a favorite among the sales associates who competed to dress her our bar. Parents, both successful attorneys with their own firm, maintained what they considered balanced expectations. Dad would review my academic achievements with pride, nodding approvingly at my straight-A report cards and my acceptance into the National Honor Society. But his eyes truly lit up when Sophia walked into his office wearing a new dress, spinning to show off the latest addition to her wardrobe. Mom was more subtle in her preferences, but the evidence was undeniable in how she allocated her time and attention. Family gatherings became showcases for Sophia's social conquests and my academic accomplishments. Extended relatives would coo over Sophia's latest boyfriend or her stunning prom dress photos, while my science Olympiad trophies were mentioned in passing before conversation moved to more engaging topics. Intelligence is admirable, I once overheard Mom telling her sister. But Sophia has that special something that opens doors intelligence alone never can. The pattern of taking what mattered to me started subtly. In middle school, Sophia would borrow my favorite books, returning them with pages dog-eared and sometimes never returning them at all. She'd casually mention to my friends that she was available to hang out, gradually becoming the preferred companion for weekend activities. When I expressed interest in joining the drama club freshman year, Sophia auditioned the same week, landing the lead role in the spring production while I was assigned to the costume committee. "It's not my fault I'm more naturally suited for these things," she would say when I confronted her, her tone suggesting I was being unreasonable for feeling displaced. "Maybe if you put yourself out there more, you wouldn't always be overlooked." Each incident stung, but I channeled my frustration into academic excellence. My determination paid off when I was accepted into Northwestern University's accelerated pre-med program with a full scholarship. The acceptance letter represented more than just educational opportunity. It was validation that my efforts had value, even if they weren't always appreciated at home. During my first 3 years at Northwestern, I discovered who Maya could be when she wasn't constantly compared to Sophia. The pre-med program was rigorous and competitive, but I thrived in an environment where intelligence and dedication were the primary currencies. I made genuine friendships with classmates who valued substance over surface appeal, and for the First time in my life, I felt truly seen and appreciated. My visits home became increasingly brief and strategic. Holiday dinners were endured rather than enjoyed, and I found excuses to cut short any extended stays. The distance allowed me to build confidence and develop an identity independent of family dynamics. I even began dating Marcus, a fellow pre-med student whose quiet intensity matched my own. Our relationship was built on shared ambitions and intellectual compatibility, a stark contrast to the dramatic romances that seemed to define Sophia's social life. But everything changed during the spring of my junior year when Dad called with news that would force me to reconsider my carefully constructed boundaries. "Sophia's been having a difficult time," he explained during what I thought would be a routine check-in call. "Her grades are slipping, and she seems lost about her future. Direction? Your mother thinks it would help if you spent more time at home this summer, maybe provide some guidance and sisterly support." The request was phrased as a suggestion, but the underlying expectation was clear. Despite years of Sophia receiving preferential treatment and my own need to focus on MCAT preparation, I was being asked to sacrifice my summer plans to help the sister who had spent our entire childhood undermining my confidence. "I have research obligations at the lab," I protested, which was true. Dr. Patterson had offered me a position in his neuroscience research team, an opportunity that could strengthen my medical school applications. "I'm sure Dr. Patterson would understand," Dad replied, his tone carrying the weight of family obligation. "Sophia needs her sister right now, Maya. This is what families do for each other." The irony wasn't lost on me. When I had needed family support during countless instances of Sophia's betrayals, understanding and accommodation had been notably absent. But now that the golden child was struggling, my needs were expected to take a back seat to family harmony. Against my better judgment and Dr. Patterson's disappointment, I agreed to spend the summer at home. I rationalized the decision by telling myself that perhaps adult Sophia would be different, that college and real-world experiences might have matured her beyond the petty rivalries of our youth. My optimism was cautiously reinforced when Sophia met me at O'Hare Airport with what appeared to be genuine enthusiasm. She had matured physically, her beauty now sophisticated rather than merely pretty. But more importantly, she seemed subdued, less confident than the sister I remembered. "I've missed having you around," she said as we drove through familiar neighborhoods toward home. "College has been harder than I expected. I keep thinking about how easily everything came to you academically, and I wonder if I inherited any of those smart genes." Her vulnerability was unexpected and disarming. For the first time in our relationship, Sophia was positioning me as the successful sister, the one with answers and direction. The role reversal was both flattering and concerning, but I chose to interpret it as growth and maturity. The first few weeks of summer passed peacefully. Sophia was attending community college part-time while working at an upscale boutique downtown. She seemed genuinely interested in my pre-med experiences and asked thoughtful questions about my research work. We even managed a few shopping trips and movie nights that felt like the sisterly bonding our parents had always claimed to want for us. It was during this period of cautious reconciliation that I met Tyler Morrison at the Lake Forest Beach Club's 4th of July celebration. I had reluctantly agreed to attend with Sophia, who insisted that hiding in our house all summer would be a waste of my rare time at home. Tyler was working as a lifeguard for the summer, a job that showcased his athletic build and easy smile. Unlike the prep school boys I'd grown up around, there was something genuine and unpretentious about him. When Sophia and I approached the snack bar, he was helping an elderly club member with her chair, his patience and kindness evident in how he ensured she was comfortable before returning to his post. "You're Maya Richardson, right?" he asked when I ordered a lemonade. "You were a year ahead of me at Lake Forest High. I remember you from Model UN." I was surprised he remembered me at all. Tyler had been popular without being arrogant, the type of student who was friendly with everyone but particularly close to the athletic crowd. Our social circles had barely overlapped during high school. That's right, I replied, pleased that the interaction he recalled was academic rather than social. You were on the varsity soccer team. Still am, actually. I'm playing at DePaul on a partial scholarship. His pride in this accomplishment was evident, but not boastful. What about you? I heard you got into Northwestern's pre-med program. As we talked, I discovered that Tyler's college experience had been as transformative as mine, but in different ways. He spoke passionately about his sports medicine classes and his goal of becoming a physical therapist. There was depth beneath his athlete exterior, a thoughtfulness that hadn't been apparent during our high school years. Would you maybe want to get coffee sometime? He asked, as Sophia appeared at my elbow, having finished her conversation with a group of high school friends. I'd love to hear more about your research work. Before I could respond, Sophia interjected herself into our conversation with practiced ease. Tyler Morrison, I didn't know you were working here this summer. Her smile was radiant, her posture shifting slightly to emphasize her figure in her designer swimsuit. Hi, Sophia, Tyler replied politely, but his attention remained focused on me. I was just asking Maya about getting coffee. How fun, Sophia exclaimed, seemingly delighted by this development. Maya never talks about her social life at school. I was starting to worry she'd forgotten how to have fun. The comment was typical Sophia, appearing supportive while subtly undermining. But Tyler's expression remained unchanged, his interest in me apparently undeterred by her implication that I was socially awkward. So what do you say, Maya? He pressed. Are you free tomorrow afternoon? I accepted his invitation, ignoring Sophia's too bright smile and the calculating look that flashed briefly in her eyes. Later, as we walked to the parking lot, she peppered me with questions about Tyler that seemed innocent enough but felt like reconnaissance. I always thought he was cute in high school, she mused as we reached her car. Such a shame he was always so focused on soccer. I bet he's gotten even more attractive in college. My coffee date with Tyler exceeded all expectations. We met at a small cafe in downtown Lake Forest, far from the country club crowd and the social pressures of our shared background. Tyler was easy to talk to, genuinely interested in my experiences at Northwestern and my goals for medical school. Unlike Marcus, whose intellectual compatibility sometimes felt competitive, Tyler's attention felt purely supportive. I have to admit, he said as we shared a piece of chocolate cake, I always thought you were intimidatingly smart in high school. You seemed so serious and focused. I figured you'd think talking to a jock was beneath you. I was serious, I admitted, maybe too serious. I thought popularity and intelligence were mutually exclusive. Maybe they were in high school, Tyler said, reaching across the table to briefly touch my hand. But I'd like to think we've both grown beyond those categories. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. Our second date was dinner at a small Italian restaurant, followed by a walk along Lake Michigan. Tyler was attentive in ways that felt natural rather than calculated. He remembered details from our previous conversations, asked follow-up questions about my research, and shared stories about his own college experiences that revealed both humor and depth. By our third date, I was beginning to understand what I'd been missing in my relationship with Marcus. Tyler combined physical attraction with emotional connection in ways that felt effortless and exciting. When he kissed me goodnight after a day spent hiking at the Morton Arboretum, I felt something I'd never experienced with anyone else. I really like you, Maya, he said, his forehead resting against mine as we stood on my family's front porch. I hope this isn't just a summer thing for you. It's not, I replied, meaning it completely. For the first time in my life, I was experiencing the kind of romance I'd watched other girls enjoy, but never thought was meant for me. Our relationship developed throughout July with an intensity that surprised us both. Tyler would finish his lifeguard shifts and drive directly to whatever plans we'd made. Sometimes we'd join Sophia and her friends for group activities, but more often we preferred time alone together. We'd explore hidden beaches along the North Shore, discover small towns with antique shops and local diners, or simply spend hours talking in his car overlooking the lake. Tyler was different from any boy I'd dated. Where Marcus approached our relationship like a research project, analyzing compatibility and future potential, Tyler was purely present. He celebrated my acceptance into a competitive summer research program without immediately calculating how it would affect our time together. When I stressed about MCAT preparation, he offered to quiz me with flashcards rather than suggesting I was being unnecessarily anxious. "You're going to be an amazing doctor," he told me one evening as we sat on the pier behind the yacht club, watching sailboats navigate the harbor. "But you're also an amazing person right now. You don't have to earn my admiration by achieving something else." His words touched something deep inside me, addressing insecurities I hadn't even realized I carried. All my life, I'd felt like my worth was contingent on my next accomplishment, my next academic success. Tyler was the first person to suggest that who I was in the moment was enough. Sophia seemed supportive of our relationship, at least superficially. She would ask about our dates with apparent interest and occasionally suggest activities we might enjoy together. But there were subtle signs that suggested her acceptance wasn't as genuine as it appeared. She began joining us for group activities more frequently, always looking stunning in carefully chosen outfits that emphasized her natural advantages. During conversations, she would share amusing anecdotes about my childhood that positioned her as the outgoing, fun sister, while casting me as the serious, studious one. The stories weren't malicious, but they created a dynamic where Tyler was constantly reminded of our contrasting personalities. "Maya was always the responsible one," she would say with a laugh that sounded affectionate but felt pointed. Even in elementary school, she was more interested in library books than playground games. I used to worry she'd forget how to be spontaneous. Tyler would usually respond by taking my hand or finding some way to show that he valued the qualities Sophia was subtly criticizing. But I noticed him beginning to ask questions about my social life at Northwestern, as if wondering whether I was too serious for my own good. The shift became more pronounced as August approached, and our time together grew more limited. Tyler would mention activities he thought might be fun, suggestions that usually involved groups of people or social events that weren't typical of our usual preferences. When I preferred quieter activities, he would agree, but with a slight hesitation that hadn't been there before. "Sophia mentioned that you don't go to many parties at Northwestern," he said one evening as we decided between a movie and a bonfire party some of his high school friends were hosting. "She seemed surprised that someone your age would prefer staying into socializing." "Did she?" I replied, recognizing the familiar pattern of Sophia planting seeds of doubt. "What else did she say about my social life?" Tyler looked uncomfortable, realizing he'd ventured into potentially problematic territory. "Nothing specific. She just seemed concerned that you might be missing out on typical college experiences." It was a masterful manipulation on Sophia's part. She had positioned herself as the caring sister worried about my social development, while subtly suggesting to Tyler that I was perhaps too withdrawn for someone my age. The conversation planted exactly the doubt she had intended. As my eye return to Northwestern approached, Tyler and I began discussing how to maintain our relationship during the academic year. The logistics were manageable. Lake Forest was less than an hour from Evanston, and Tyler would be returning to DePaul, which was even closer. But I sensed a new uncertainty in his demeanor that hadn't existed earlier in the summer. "Maybe you should focus on your studies this year," he suggested during a conversation that I thought would be about planning weekend visits. "Senior year is important, and I don't want to be a distraction from your goals." The suggestion was so contrary to everything our relationship had been about that I immediately suspected outside influence. Tyler had been one of the few people in my life who supported my ambitions without treating them as obstacles to personal happiness. "Since when do you think a relationship has to interfere with academic success?" I asked. That's never been an issue for us before." Tyler looked genuinely confused, as if he was questioning assumptions he'd recently acquired rather than beliefs he'd always held. "I just want what's best for you, Maya. Sometimes people need different things at different stages of their lives." The conversation felt surreal, like Tyler was reciting advice someone else had given him, rather than expressing his own feelings. But before I could pursue the matter further, Sophia appeared with a group of friends who were planning an impromptu trip to Navy Pier. "You two look so serious," she exclaimed, her timing perfectly calculated to interrupt our discussion. "Come on. Maya needs to have some fun before she disappears back into her books for another semester." Tyler immediately brightened at the suggestion, his relief at avoiding our previous conversation evident. As we joined the group heading toward the city, I watched Sophia work her subtle magic, positioning herself as the bridge between Tyler and a more social version of me. During the drive to Navy Pier, she entertained everyone with stories about our childhood, carefully selected anecdotes that painted her as the adventurous sister and me as the cautious one. By the time we reached the lakefront, Tyler was looking at me with a mixture of affection and concern, as if seeing me through new eyes that questioned whether I was capable of the spontaneity he was beginning to value. The evening at Navy Pier was a preview of what I would later recognize as Sophia's strategy for undermining our relationship. She didn't flirt with Tyler directly or obviously compete for his attention. Instead, she created situations where she appeared to be the more compatible companion, the sister who could help him have the kind of fun that apparently Maya was too serious to provide. When the group decided to ride the Ferris wheel, Sophia suggested that Tyler and I should go together while she partnered with someone else. But somehow the logistics never worked out that way, and she ended up in the gondola with Tyler while I rode with one of her friends who spent the entire experience texting rather than talking. Later, during dinner at a crowded restaurant overlooking the lake, seating arrangements placed Sophia next to Tyler while I was positioned across the table. From my vantage point, I could observe their interaction without participating. Sophia was animated and engaging, laughing at Tyler's jokes and contributing her own amusing observations. She managed to touch his arm casually during conversation, lean in to hear him better in the noisy environment, and generally create an atmosphere of intimate connection. Tyler responded exactly as Sophia had intended. He was clearly enjoying her attention and her apparent appreciation for his humor. More troublingly, he kept glancing at me as if comparing our different approaches to the social situation. Where Sophia was vivacious and present, I felt increasingly withdrawn and analytical, observing the dynamics rather than participating in them. On the drive home, Tyler was unusually quiet. When he walked me to the door later that evening, his goodnight kiss felt perfunctory rather than passionate. "Is everything okay?" I asked, sensing a distance that hadn't existed that morning. "Of course," he replied, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "I just had a really fun time tonight. It's nice to see you in different social situations." The implication was subtle, but unmistakable. Tyler was suggesting that he preferred me in group settings where Sophia's influence encouraged me to be more outgoing. He was beginning to see our quiet, intimate dates as limitations rather than preferences. Over the next few days, as my departure for Northwestern approached, Tyler's behavior became increasingly inconsistent. He would make plans with apparent enthusiasm, then suggest including Sophia and her friends. When I preferred our original plans, he would agree, but with visible disappointment. The night before I was scheduled to return to campus, Tyler took me to dinner at the same Italian restaurant, where we'd had our second date. I hoped the familiar setting would recapture the connection we'd felt throughout most of the summer, but Tyler seemed distracted and uncertain. "Maya," he began, his tone suggesting a serious conversation was approaching. "I've been thinking about what we talked about before, about focusing on your studies this year." My heart began to race, recognizing that this conversation would determine the future of our relationship. "What specifically have you been thinking?" Tyler took a deep breath, his discomfort obvious. Maybe we should take a break during the school year. See how we both feel next summer when you're home again. The suggestion hit me like a physical blow, but I forced myself to remain calm. Where is this coming from, Tyler? 2 weeks ago, you were talking about visiting me at Northwestern. He looked genuinely conflicted, as if he was questioning his own logic even as he voiced it. I just think maybe we want different things from a relationship. You're so focused on your future, and I'm looking for something more present. The phrasing was so similar to comments Sophia had made about my personality that I immediately suspected her influence. But accusing Tyler of being manipulated would only make me appear paranoid and controlling. What does more present mean? I asked, hoping he would recognize the contradiction in his reasoning. Tyler struggled to articulate an explanation that would justify his change of heart. I guess I'm realizing that I want to be with someone who's excited about the same things I'm excited about, someone who values fun and spontaneity as much as achievement and planning. Each word was a knife twisted deeper, because they weren't really Tyler's values speaking. Throughout our entire relationship, he had appreciated and supported my goals. He had never suggested that ambition and spontaneity were mutually exclusive, or that my personality was somehow deficient. Someone like Sophia? I asked quietly, finally voicing the suspicion that had been growing throughout our conversation. Tyler's reaction confirmed my fears. He didn't deny the comparison or act shocked by the suggestion. Instead, he looked guilty and defensive, like someone who had been caught in behavior he wasn't proud of. "This isn't about Sophia," he said, but his tone lacked conviction. "This is about what I need in a relationship. And what you need has apparently changed since you started spending more time with my sister," I replied, no longer trying to hide my hurt and anger. Tyler's silence was more damning than any confession could have been. In that moment, I realized that Sophia had successfully executed the same strategy she'd been using our entire lives. She had identified something I valued, positioned herself as a superior alternative, and gradually convinced the other party that she was the better choice. The key difference was that this time, the stakes were much higher than childhood friendships or high school activities. Tyler represented the first genuine romantic connection I'd experienced, the first person who had valued me for who I was rather than what I could achieve. Losing him felt like confirmation of my deepest fear, that I would always be the serious sister, the responsible one, but never the one who was chosen when more appealing options were available. "I think you should go," I said, standing up from our table before Tyler could offer any more explanations that would only deepen my humiliation. Tyler tried to protest, reaching for my hand as I gathered my purse. "Maya, please don't leave like this. Can't we talk about this?" "There's nothing left to talk about," I replied, pulling away from his touch. "You've made your choice clear." As I walked toward the restaurant's exit, I heard Tyler call my name once more, but I didn't turn around. The evening air felt cool against my flushed skin as I stood on the sidewalk, considering my options for getting home. I could call my parents, but explaining why I was stranded at a restaurant without Tyler would require admitting that my relationship was ending badly. I could call a taxi, but the expense would raise questions when the charge appeared on my credit card statement. Finally, I decided to walk. Lake Forest wasn't large, and the distance to my family's house was manageable if I stayed on well-lit streets. The exercise would give me time to process what had just happened and prepare for the inevitable questions about why Tyler hadn't driven me home. As I walked through familiar neighborhoods, passing houses where I'd attended birthday parties and holiday gatherings throughout my childhood, I reflected on the pattern of loss that seemed to define my relationship with Sophia. Every time I found something or someone that brought me happiness, she managed to position herself as a more attractive alternative. But this betrayal felt different from the childhood disappointments. Tyler and I had built something real over the course of the summer, a connection based on genuine compatibility and mutual respect. The fact that it could be so easily undermined suggested that perhaps it hadn't been as solid as I'd believed, or that I was fundamentally lacking in the qualities that made relationships last. By the time I reached our house, I had constructed a story about Tyler having a family emergency that required him to leave suddenly. My parents accepted the explanation without much interest, already focused on preparing for my departure the next morning. I packed my belongings that night with mechanical efficiency, trying not to think about the texts Tyler had sent apologizing for how our conversation had ended and asking if we could talk before I left for Northwestern. I deleted each message without responding, determined to preserve what remained of my dignity. The next morning, as Dad loaded my suitcases into the car for the drive to Evanston, Sophia appeared in the driveway to say goodbye. She was wearing a sundress I'd never seen before, her hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. She looked beautiful and fresh, like someone anticipating an exciting day rather than a sad farewell. "I'm going to miss having you home," she said, hugging me with what appeared to be genuine affection. "This summer has been so special, getting to spend real time together as adults." Her words were perfectly appropriate, but something in her tone suggested satisfaction rather than sadness. As I hugged her back, I wondered if she was already planning her next move with Tyler, or if she had been planning it all along. "Take care of yourself, Sophia," I replied, meaning it despite everything that had happened. In that moment, I realized that my anger toward Tyler was actually secondary to my disappointment in my sister. Tyler had been manipulated, but Sophia had done the manipulating. As we drove away from Lake Forest, I watched the familiar landscape disappear in the rearview mirror. The suburbs where I'd grown up suddenly felt like a stage set, a beautiful facade hiding the ugly dynamics that had shaped my understanding of love and loyalty. Northwestern's campus welcomed me back with its Gothic architecture and the promise of a new academic year filled with challenges I was actually equipped to handle. Unlike the messy complications of family relationships and romantic betrayals, medical school preparation offered clear goals and measurable outcomes. I threw myself into senior year with renewed intensity, using academic achievement as both distraction and validation. My research work expanded under Dr. Patterson's mentorship, and my MCAT preparation became a full-time obsession. Classmates who tried to include me in social activities gradually stopped trying as I declined invitation after invitation. Marcus, my former boyfriend, attempted to rekindle our relationship early in the fall semester. His approach was characteristically logical. We were compatible intellectually, shared career goals, and had a history of successful academic collaboration. But after experiencing the emotional connection I'd felt with Tyler, Marcus's rational approach to romance felt hollow and unsatisfying. "You seem different this year," Marcus observed during one of our study sessions in the library. "More focused, but also more withdrawn. Did something happen over the summer?" I deflected his questions with comments about the increasing pressure of senior year and medical school applications. The truth was too complicated and too painful to share, especially with someone who analyzed emotions like research data. Throughout the fall semester, I received occasional updates about Tyler through mutual friends who had also returned to Northwestern from Lake Forest. The information arrived in casual comments during conversations about hometown news, each update feeling like a small wound being reopened. Tyler was having a successful season with DePaul's soccer team, someone mentioned during a study group discussion about weekend plans. He'd been named team captain and was being scouted by professional organizations. The news should have made me happy for him, but instead it reminded me of all the conversations we'd had about his athletic goals and my role in supporting his dreams. Later, a friend from high school mentioned seeing Tyler at a Lake Forest coffee shop during her own visit home for fall break. "He was with your sister," she added casually, not realizing the significance of this information. "They looked pretty cozy together." The confirmation of what I'd suspected since our last dinner together still hit me like a physical blow. Despite all my logical preparation for this possibility, hearing it stated as fact made the betrayal feel fresh and immediate. I excused myself from the conversation and found a quiet bathroom where I could process the information privately. Sitting in a locked stall, I finally allowed myself to cry for the relationship I'd lost and the sister whose loyalty had never really existed. But even in my grief, I recognized something important about my reaction. The pain was real, but it wasn't devastating in the way I'd expected. 4 months of focusing on my own goals and rebuilding my confidence had given me perspective on what had happened. Tyler and Sophia deserved each other, and I deserved better than either of them had been willing to offer. My medical school applications were submitted ahead of schedule, each one representing not just academic achievement, but personal growth. I had learned to value my own judgment over others' validation, to find satisfaction in accomplishments that belonged entirely to me. The interviews began in January, taking me to prestigious institutions across the country. Each interaction reinforced my sense of competence and professional identity. Admissions committees were impressed by my research experience, but more importantly, they seemed to recognize qualities of character that I was finally beginning to see in myself. During an interview at Johns Hopkins, one of the professors made a comment that stayed with me long after our conversation ended. "We look for candidates who demonstrate resilience," she explained when I asked about their selection criteria. "Medical training is challenging, but practicing medicine requires the ability to recover from setbacks and maintain perspective during difficult situations. Your application suggests someone who has learned to transform disappointment into determination." Her observation surprised me, because I hadn't specifically mentioned the challenges of the previous summer in my application materials. But apparently, the growth I'd experienced was evident in how I presented myself and discussed my goals. Spring semester brought acceptance letters from multiple medical schools, validation that my academic focus had paid off professionally, even as it helped me heal personally. The choice between programs was difficult, but ultimately came down to Northwestern's own medical school, which offered both prestige and the comfort of familiar surroundings. As my undergraduate experience drew to a close, I reflected on how much had changed since that night at the Italian restaurant when Tyler had ended our relationship. The pain of that betrayal had initially felt like confirmation of my worst fears about myself. But ultimately, it had forced me to confront patterns of thinking that had been limiting my potential for genuine happiness. I realized that I had been seeking validation from people who were fundamentally unable to provide it, whether due to their own insecurities or their inability to appreciate qualities that didn't conform to conventional expectations. Tyler's preference for Sophia wasn't a judgment on my worth. It was information about his character and his capacity for recognizing what I had to offer. More importantly, I understood that my own happiness couldn't depend on others' choices or preferences. The satisfaction I'd found in academic achievement was real and valuable, but it had been incomplete when it was my only source of self-worth. Learning to appreciate my own company, my own interests, and my own goals had been more transformative than any romantic relationship could have been. On graduation day, as I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I spotted my parents, in the audience beaming with pride. They had driven down from Lake Forest to attend the ceremony, bringing flowers and promises of a celebration dinner afterward. Noticeably absent was Sophia, who had apparently been too busy to attend her sister's undergraduate graduation. The omission didn't sting the way it would have a year earlier. By now, I understood that Sophia's absence was more revealing about her character than about my importance. People who truly valued me would make the effort to be present for significant moments, while those who didn't would always have excuses. After the ceremony, as we posed for photos in front of Northwestern's iconic arches, Dad mentioned that Sophia was still dating Tyler and that they seemed quite serious. "She's been spending most of her time at his apartment," he said. as if this information might interest me. "That's nice," I replied, meaning it. I genuinely hoped they would find happiness together, even if their relationship had been built on the ruins of mine. More importantly, I had reached a point where their happiness or unhappiness was no longer connected to my own sense of worth. Medical school orientation began just 3 weeks after graduation, launching me into the most demanding academic experience of my life. The pace was relentless, the competition fierce, and the stakes higher than anything I'd previously encountered. But I thrived in the environment, finding both purpose and community among classmates who shared my dedication to healing others. My social life remained limited by choice rather than circumstance. I formed study partnerships and casual friendships, but I avoided romantic entanglements that might distract from my goals or repeat the painful patterns of my past. The decision felt empowering rather than limiting, a conscious choice to prioritize my own growth over others' expectations. During rare visits home, usually for major holidays, I observed Tyler and Sophia's relationship with detached curiosity. They seemed happy in ways that were visible but somehow surface level, their connection based on shared social interests and physical attraction rather than deeper compatibility. Tyler had completed his degree at DePaul and was working as a physical therapist at a local sports medicine clinic. His professional success was evident, and he seemed satisfied with his career trajectory. But I noticed that he rarely mentioned long-term goals or expressed ambitions beyond his immediate circumstances. Sophia had enrolled at a local community college, ostensibly pursuing a degree in communications, though her attendance seemed sporadic and her enthusiasm minimal. She spent most of her time managing Tyler's social calendar and maintaining her appearance, roles that seemed to fulfill her need for purpose and validation. Their relationship dynamic reminded me of my parents' marriage, built on traditional, gender expectations and complementary rather than comparable strengths. There was nothing wrong with such an arrangement if both parties were genuinely satisfied, but I couldn't help wondering if either of them ever questioned whether they were settling for compatibility rather than pursuing genuine connection. During Christmas dinner. My first year of medical school, Tyler made what appeared to be significant announcements about their future plans. They were moving in together officially, combining their finances and discussing long-term commitments that sounded like preparation for eventual marriage. "We're looking at houses in Lake Forest," Sophia announced, her engagement ring finger conspicuously bare, but her tone suggesting that detail was merely a technicality. "Something with enough space for entertaining and close to both our families." The news was received with enthusiasm by my parents, who clearly approved of Tyler as a son-in-law prospect. His family background, athletic achievements, and stable career made him exactly the type of young man they had always envisioned for their daughters. I congratulated them with sincerity, genuinely pleased that they had found happiness together, even under circumstances that had once caused me pain. More importantly, I realized that I felt no lingering attachment to the outcome of their relationship. Tyler had become a character in someone else's story. Medical school consumed the next 4 years of my life with an intensity that left little room for dwelling on past disappointments. The rigorous curriculum, clinical rotations, and constant pressure to excel created a world where success was measured in concrete achievements rather than social victories. I flourished in this environment, finding both purpose and validation in my growing medical expertise. During my third-year clinical rotations, I discovered my passion for cardiothoracic surgery. The precision required, the high stakes of each procedure, and the intellectual complexity of the field appealed to everything I valued about medicine. My supervising physicians noted my steady hands, calm demeanor under pressure, and ability to think quickly during complications. "You have the temperament for surgery," Dr. Elizabeth Chen, the chief of cardiothoracic surgery at Northwestern Memorial, told me during my rotation evaluation. "It's not just technical skill, though you clearly have that. It's the mental resilience, to handle life and death decisions without losing your humanity. Her endorsement opened doors to competitive residency programs across the country. The application process was grueling, requiring research presentations, interviews at multiple institutions, and letters of recommendation from the most demanding professors I'd encountered. But each step forward felt like confirmation that I had found my true calling. My personal life during medical school remained deliberately limited. I dated occasionally, brief relationships with fellow students or residents that never progressed beyond casual companionship. The emotional investment required for serious relationships felt like an unnecessary distraction from my professional goals. More importantly, I had learned to be selective about the people I allowed into my inner circle. The few classmates who became close friends were individuals who appreciated my focused nature rather than viewing it as a limitation. Sarah Martinez, my study partner throughout preclinical years, shared my intensity and understood my reluctance to discuss family dynamics. David Kim, a brilliant student planning to specialize in neurosurgery, became a trusted colleague who never questioned my dedication to excellence. These friendships felt different from relationships I'd had before medical school. They were built on mutual respect for each other's goals rather than expectations about who we should become to please others. Sarah and David accepted my serious nature as a strength rather than a personality flaw that needed correction. During rare visits home, I observed the progression of Tyler and Sophia's relationship with detached interest. They had moved into a renovated Victorian house 3 blocks from my parents' home, creating a life that seemed designed to meet external expectations rather than reflect personal passions. Tyler's physical therapy practice was thriving, and he had become a prominent figure in Lake Forest's recreational sports community. He coached youth soccer teams, organized charity tournaments, and served on the board of the local athletic club. His success was undeniable, but it seemed confined to a relatively small geographic and social sphere. Sophia had abandoned her community, college studies after 2 semesters, instead focusing her energy on home decoration, social planning, and maintaining her appearance. She had transformed their house into a showcase of current design trends, hosting dinner parties and holiday gatherings that were featured in local lifestyle publications. Their relationship appeared stable and socially successful, yet I noticed subtle signs of dissatisfaction during family gatherings. Tyler would sometimes glance around conversations as if looking for something more stimulating, while Sophia's constant focus on entertaining and appearances suggested an underlying anxiety about maintaining their social status. "When are you going to find time for a serious relationship?" Mom asked during Christmas dinner my final year of medical school. "You're going to be 27 soon, Maya. Even with your career ambitions, you should be thinking about marriage and family." Her question reflected familiar assumptions about women's priorities that I had long since stopped trying to challenge. "I'm focused on matching into a good residency program right now," I replied diplomatically. "There will be time for other considerations later." "Tyler and Sophia have been talking about engagement," Mom continued, apparently determined to contrast my choices with my sister's more traditional path. "They're looking at summer weddings, something elegant but not too formal." I made appropriate responses to this information, but privately wondered whether Tyler was genuinely ready for marriage, or simply following the expected timeline of their relationship. Throughout the evening, I observed him interact with Sophia and noticed a quality of going through the motions rather than active engagement. Sophia, meanwhile, seemed increasingly focused on external validation. She spent considerable time during dinner describing their recent vacation to Napa Valley, their plans for kitchen renovations, and her involvement with various charitable committees. Her conversation was animated but somehow hollow, filled with details about lifestyle choices rather than personal growth or meaningful experiences. Match day arrived in March of my final year, the annual event where medical students across the country simultaneously learn where they'll complete their residency training. I had ranked my preferences carefully, with the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, as my top choice for their renowned cardiothoracic surgery program. The envelope containing my match results felt weightier than its actual contents, representing not just the next phase of my medical training, but validation of everything I'd worked toward since that painful summer after junior year. When I opened it to find Mayo Clinic's letterhead, the satisfaction was profound and entirely my own. "Congratulations," Sarah said as we compared our results in the student lounge. She had matched into pediatrics at Boston Children's Hospital, another competitive achievement that reflected her years of dedicated preparation. "Mayo Clinic for cardiothoracic surgery. That's incredible, Maya." The accomplishment felt different from academic achievements I'd celebrated in the past. This wasn't just about grades or test scores, but about being selected for training that would determine my career trajectory and professional identity. The admissions committee had evaluated not just my knowledge, but my character, my potential, and my fit with their institutional culture. My parents drove down from Lake Forest for the medical school graduation ceremony, bringing flowers and expressing appropriate pride in my achievement. During the reception afterward, they introduced me to other families as our daughter, the future heart surgeon, a title that seemed to genuinely impress them in ways my previous accomplishments hadn't quite managed. "We always knew Maya would do something significant," Dad told Dr. Patterson, my research mentor, during their conversation at the refreshments table. "She's been driven since childhood, always working toward some goal." His assessment was accurate, but incomplete. Drive and ambition had been part of my personality from an early age, but the events of the past 6 years had refined those qualities into something more purposeful and self-directed than mere achievement-seeking. The summer between medical school graduation and beginning residency offered a rare opportunity for rest and reflection. I spent most of it in a small apartment I rented near Northwestern's campus, reading novels I'd postponed for years and allowing myself to think about aspects of life beyond medical training. It was during this contemplative period that I received unexpected news about Tyler and Sophia. The information came through Jennifer Walsh, a high school classmate who had remained in touch with various Lake Forest social circles. "Did you hear about Tyler and Sophia?" Jennifer asked during a phone call ostensibly about our upcoming 10-year high school reunion. "They broke up last month, apparently pretty dramatically." The news surprised me more than it should have, given my observations about their relationship dynamics. "What happened?" I asked, curious despite my efforts to maintain distance from their drama. "From what I heard, Tyler caught Sophia with someone else," Jennifer explained, her tone suggesting she was sharing particularly juicy gossip. "Some guy she met through her charity committee work. Apparently, it had been going on for months." The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. Sophia, who had stolen Tyler from me by positioning herself as more fun and spontaneous, had ultimately betrayed him in exactly the ways she had encouraged him to fear serious, committed relationships. "How is Tyler handling it?" I asked, surprised by my genuine concern for someone who had caused me considerable pain. "Not well, from what I understand. He's moved back in with his parents temporarily and seems pretty devastated. I guess he really thought they were going to get married." Despite everything that had happened between us, I felt sympathy for Tyler's situation. Being betrayed by someone you trust is painful, regardless of the circumstances that brought you together. More importantly, I recognized that his experience might help him understand what he had put me through years earlier. The conversation with Jennifer made me realize how completely I had moved beyond the emotional investment in Tyler and Sophia's relationship. The news of their breakup didn't provide the satisfaction I might have expected based on how deeply their betrayal had hurt me. Instead, it felt like information about strangers whose choices no longer had any bearing on my life. Residency at Mayo Clinic began in July with an intensity that made medical school seem leisurely by comparison. The learning curve was steep, the hours brutal, and the responsibility overwhelming. I was now making decisions that directly affected patient outcomes, performing procedures under supervision, and gradually developing the skills that would define my surgical career. The physical and mental demands of surgical training left little time for reflecting on personal relationships or family dynamics. My world narrowed to the hospital, medical literature, and the few hours of sleep I managed, between 36-hour shifts. It was an exhausting but deeply satisfying existence that provided clear metrics for success and failure. My colleagues in the program were equally dedicated individuals who had sacrificed similar personal freedoms for their professional ambitions. We formed intense bonds forged through shared challenges and mutual dependence during difficult cases. These relationships felt more genuine and supportive than many of the social connections I'd experienced in previous phases of my life. Dr. Michael Stevens, the program director, became both a demanding mentor and an unlikely source of perspective on work-life balance. Despite his reputation as one of the most accomplished cardiothoracic surgeons in the country, he made time for his family and maintained interests outside medicine. "Surgery will consume as much of your life as you allow it to," he told me during one of our regular evaluation meetings. "The key is deciding consciously what you're willing to sacrifice and what you want to preserve. Too many residents make those decisions by default rather than by choice." His advice resonated with my own growing awareness that professional success, while deeply satisfying, couldn't be my only source of fulfillment indefinitely. But for now, the intensity of surgical training provided exactly the focus and purpose I needed to continue growing as both a physician and a person. During my second year of residency, I received an invitation to my high school 10-year reunion. The thick envelope arrived at my small studio apartment near Mayo Clinic, forwarded from my parents' address in Lake Forest. The committee had clearly invested considerable effort in tracking down alumni and creating an elaborate celebration. My first instinct was to decline. 10-year reunions seemed designed for people who wanted to demonstrate their success to former classmates or reconnect with old friends they'd lost touch with. Neither motivation applied to my current situation. I was satisfied with my professional progress, and the friendships I valued from high school had been maintained through more meaningful contact than a single evening of forced nostalgia. But something about the timing felt significant. I had reached a point in my training where the most intensive learning phase was behind me, and I could anticipate the surgeon I was becoming. Perhaps viewing that growth in the context of where I had started would provide useful perspective. More practically, attending the reunion would give me an opportunity to visit my parents, whom I hadn't seen since the previous Christmas. Our relationship had improved as I'd gained confidence and independence, no longer needing their approval in ways that made their preferences about Sophia painful. I requested the weekend off and booked a flight to Chicago, approaching the reunion, as I would any other professional obligation that required social interaction but offered potential benefits. My expectations were minimal, which seemed like the appropriate mindset for an event that could easily disappoint people who invested too much emotional significance in it. The reunion was held at the Lake Forest Country Club, a venue that had hosted countless social events throughout my childhood. Walking into the familiar ballroom felt like entering a time capsule, complete with decorations incorporating our class colors and blown-up photographs from various high school activities. My former classmates had changed in predictable ways. Some had gained weight, others had lost hair. Most looked like adult versions of their teenage selves with added polish from college and early career experiences. The conversations followed familiar patterns: career updates, marriage announcements, and nostalgic references to shared high school memories. I moved through these interactions with professional courtesy, updating people on my surgical residency and asking polite questions about their own life developments. The evening felt pleasant but unremarkable until I noticed Tyler standing near the bar, looking uncomfortable and alone. He had aged well, maintaining his athletic build and adding a maturity to his features that made him more handsome than he had been at 18. but there was a quality of sadness or uncertainty in his posture that suggested he was still processing recent changes in his life. Our eyes met across the room, and he approached with the careful expression of someone unsure about his reception. "Maya," he said, extending his hand in greeting. "I wasn't sure you'd be here. Congratulations on your residency at Mayo Clinic. I heard it's an incredible program." His knowledge of my professional achievements surprised me until I remembered that Lake Forest was a small community where information traveled quickly through overlapping social networks. "Thank you," I replied, shaking his hand briefly. "How are you doing, Tyler?" The question carried more weight than typical reunion small talk, given what I knew about his recent breakup with Sophia. Tyler seemed to recognize the subtext and appreciated my directness. "I've been better," he admitted, his honesty refreshing after hours of superficial catch-up conversations. "I'm sure you heard about Sophia and me ending things. It's been a difficult adjustment." I nodded sympathetically, genuinely sorry for his pain despite our complicated history. Breakups are never easy, especially after such a long relationship. "Can we talk?" Tyler asked, glancing around the crowded ballroom. "Maybe step outside for a few minutes? I'd like to—" "Well, I owe you an apology that's about 8 years overdue." His request surprised me, but my curiosity about what he wanted to say outweighed any reluctance to rehash old wounds. We walked through French doors onto a terrace overlooking the country club's golf course, the summer evening providing a peaceful backdrop for whatever conversation Tyler had in mind. "I've thought about that last night we had dinner," Tyler began, his hands clasped behind his back as he stared out at the darkening landscape. "The way I ended things between us, the reasons I gave for wanting to take a break. I was wrong, Maya. Not just about the decision, but about the way I made it." His acknowledgement of wrongdoing felt validating, though less emotionally significant than it would have years earlier. "What changed your perspective?" I asked, curious about his thought process rather than seeking any particular response. Tyler took a deep breath, clearly having prepared for this conversation. "Living with the consequences of choosing based on surface compatibility instead of deeper connection. Sophia and I looked good together, had fun together, but we never really understood each other in the way you and I did during those few months." He turned to face me directly, his expression earnest and regretful. "I let myself be convinced that what we had wasn't exciting enough, wasn't spontaneous enough. But excitement isn't the same as happiness, and spontaneity isn't the same as genuine compatibility." His analysis of their relationship was more insightful than I'd expected, suggesting that the years since our breakup had provided him with significant personal growth. "I'm sorry things didn't work out with Sophia," I said, meaning it despite the complicated circumstances of their relationship's beginning. "Are you?" Tyler asked, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Because I think you probably saw the problems with our dynamic long before I was willing to acknowledge them." His observation was accurate. Even as a 21-year-old, dealing with my own hurt and anger, I had recognized that Tyler and Sophia's attraction was based more on complementary social roles than fundamental compatibility. But pointing out those issues at the time would have seemed like sour grapes from a rejected girlfriend. "People have to discover things for themselves," I replied diplomatically. "Outside perspectives can only be helpful when someone is ready to hear them." Tyler nodded, apparently recognizing the wisdom in my response. I wasted a lot of years learning lessons I could have understood earlier if I'd been less focused on immediate gratification and more thoughtful about long-term compatibility. We stood in comfortable silence for several moments, the sounds of the reunion continuing inside while we processed the weight of our conversation. Tyler had changed in ways that made this interaction possible, developing both self-awareness and the ability to acknowledge mistakes without becoming defensive. "Can I ask you something?" Tyler said eventually. "Do you think you would have been interested in reconnecting if we'd met again under different circumstances?" If I hadn't been with Sophia all these years? The question was hypothetical, but deserved thoughtful consideration. I reflected on the person I had become during my medical training, the priorities I had developed, and the qualities I now valued in potential partners. I don't know, I answered honestly. We're both different people than we were 8 years ago. I'd like to think we could have been friends, but anything beyond that would depend on who we'd become independently. Tyler accepted my response with grace, apparently not looking for false reassurance or unrealistic possibilities. I hope we can be friends now, he said. Even if nothing else comes of it, I'd like the chance to know who Maya Richardson became after she left Lake Forest. His request felt genuine and unthreatening, coming from someone who had clearly spent considerable time reflecting on his choices and their consequences. More importantly, I realized that I was curious about Tyler's growth as well, interested in learning how he had processed the experiences that had shaped both our adult lives. I'd like that too, I replied, surprised by how much I meant it. We exchanged contact information before returning to the reunion, where the evening continued with dancing, more conversations with former classmates, and a slideshow of high school memories that felt both nostalgic and distant. But the conversation with Tyler had transformed the evening from a social obligation into something more meaningful. Over the following months, Tyler and I developed a tentative friendship through occasional emails and phone calls. Our communication was careful at first, both of us aware of the potential complications in rebuilding trust after such a painful history. But gradually, we found a comfortable rhythm of sharing professional updates, family news, and observations about our respective personal growth. Tyler was working to rebuild his social life after the end of his relationship with Sophia, a process that was apparently more challenging than he'd anticipated. Many of his friendships had been couple-based, and his social identity had become intertwined with his role as Sophia's boyfriend in ways he hadn't fully recognized. I'm realizing how much I defined myself through our relationship, he admitted, during one of our phone conversations. My hobbies, my social circle, even my living situation were all organized around what worked for us as a couple. Now I'm trying to figure out what I actually want for myself. His honesty about struggling with single life was refreshing and suggested genuine self-reflection rather than self-pity. I found myself offering perspectives from my own experience of building an independent adult identity, conversations that felt mutually beneficial rather than one-sided. Meanwhile, my residency continued to progress successfully. I was developing expertise in complex cardiac procedures and earning recognition from my supervisors for both technical skill and patient care. The satisfaction I found in surgical work continued to validate my career choice, but I was also becoming aware of aspects of life I had neglected during my years of intensive focus. Dr. Stevens had been right about the importance of conscious choices regarding work-life balance. While I remained committed to excellence in my surgical training, I began experimenting with activities outside medicine that might provide additional sources of fulfillment. I joined a hiking group that met on weekends when I wasn't on call, discovering that physical challenges in natural settings offered a different type of satisfaction than intellectual challenges in hospital settings. I also began attending cultural events in Rochester, slowly expanding my comfort zone to include activities that weren't directly related to professional development. These small steps toward a more balanced life made me more receptive to Tyler's friendship than I might have been during the most intensive phases of medical school. Our conversations provided a connection to my past that felt enriching rather than limiting, a perspective on my growth that was both affirming and challenging. During my 4th year of residency, Tyler mentioned that he was considering making changes in his own career trajectory. His physical therapy practice was successful, but he felt constrained by its limited scope and wanted to pursue additional training that would allow him to work with more complex cases. I've been looking into sports medicine fellowships, he explained during one of our calls. Programs that would let me work with professional athletes and develop expertise in advanced rehabilitation techniques. His ambition surprised me, representing a level of professional development I hadn't associated with Tyler based on his choices during our earlier relationship. But people change, and his willingness to pursue challenging training despite being established in his current career demonstrated growth in his priorities and self-confidence. "Where are you looking?" I asked, genuinely interested in his plans. "Several places, but Mayo Clinic has one of the best programs in the country," Tyler replied. "I know it's a long shot, but I'm planning to apply for their sports medicine fellowship. The worst they can do is reject me." The possibility of Tyler training at the same institution where I was completing my residency created a complexity I hadn't anticipated. Our renewed friendship was still relatively fragile, built on careful boundaries and limited contact. Daily proximity might strain the progress we'd made or create expectations that neither of us was prepared to handle. But professionally, Mayo Clinic's sports medicine program was indeed exceptional, and Tyler's interest in pursuing that training reflected exactly the kind of ambitious thinking I'd hoped he would develop. My personal comfort couldn't be a factor in his career decisions, just as his presence wouldn't influence my professional choices. "You should definitely apply," I encouraged him. "The worst outcome is valuable experience with competitive application processes, and the best outcome could transform your career trajectory." Tyler seemed pleased by my support, though he also acknowledged the potential awkwardness of the situation. "I hope it wouldn't be weird for you if I ended up training there. I know we're still figuring out how to be friends, and I wouldn't want to complicate that by creating unavoidable daily contact." His consideration for my feelings was touching and suggested the kind of thoughtfulness that had been missing from his decision-making during our earlier relationship. "If you're accepted into the program, it means you deserve to be there," I replied. "My feelings shouldn't be part of that equation." The conversation marked a turning point in our rekindled friendship, establishing that we could discuss potentially complicated situations with honesty and mutual respect. More importantly, it demonstrated that Tyler had developed the ability to consider others' perspectives while still pursuing his own goals, a balance I hadn't observed during our younger relationship. As my residency entered its final year, I began preparing for the next phase of my career. The transition from resident to attending surgeon represented not just professional advancement, but personal transformation. I would soon be responsible for my own practice, my own surgical outcomes, and my own reputation within the medical community. The prospect was both exciting and daunting, requiring me to consider not just technical competency, but leadership skills, communication abilities, and the kind of surgeon I wanted to become. These reflections naturally extended to broader questions about the kind of life I wanted to build around my medical career. For the first time since college, I found myself genuinely open to the possibility of serious romantic relationships. The intensity of surgical training had provided legitimate reasons to avoid emotional complications, but those reasons would become less compelling as I transitioned to attending status. More importantly, I had reached a level of self-knowledge and professional confidence that made me less vulnerable to the kind of manipulation I'd experienced with Tyler and Sophia. I understood my own values, trusted my own judgment, and felt secure enough in my identity to withstand external pressures to become someone I wasn't. The personal growth I'd achieved through medical training had been unexpected, but perhaps more valuable than the professional skills I'd developed. Learning to make life and death decisions under pressure has taught me to trust my instincts in all areas of life. Managing difficult patients and families has improved my ability to set boundaries and communicate clearly about my needs and limitations. Most importantly, succeeding in an extremely competitive field had proven to myself that I was capable of achieving goals that mattered to me, regardless of whether others understood or supported those ambitions. That knowledge provided a foundation of self-confidence that could weather future challenges without being shaken. When Tyler called in March to tell me he'd been accepted into Mayo Clinic's sports medicine fellowship, I felt genuinely happy for His achievement. The program was highly competitive, and his acceptance reflected both his qualifications and his commitment to professional growth. "I start in July," he said, his excitement evident even through the phone connection. "I know, this might make things complicated between us, but I hope we can figure out how to navigate it." "Congratulations," I replied, meaning it completely. "This is an incredible opportunity for you. We'll handle whatever complications arise." His acceptance created an interesting parallel to our lives' trajectories. We were both entering new phases of our medical careers at the same institution, both transitioning from training focused on individual excellence to roles that would require collaboration and leadership. The coincidence felt significant, though I couldn't predict what it might mean for our relationship. As my final months of residency passed, I found myself looking forward to Tyler's arrival with curiosity rather than anxiety. Our friendship had survived the test of renewed contact and honest conversation about our past mistakes. Perhaps it could also survive the challenges of daily professional proximity and the inevitable questions from colleagues about our history. More importantly, I was beginning to recognize that Tyler's presence in my life had become genuinely valuable rather than simply nostalgic. Our conversations challenged me to articulate my own growth and reflect on the choices that had shaped my adult identity. His perspectives on work-life balance and personal relationships offered insights I might not have developed independently. The week before Tyler was scheduled to begin his fellowship, we met for dinner at a restaurant in downtown Rochester. It was our first face-to-face meeting since the high school reunion, and I was curious to see how our in-person dynamic had evolved. Tyler looked older and more serious than he had at the reunion, the result of a year spent preparing for the next phase of his career. But he also seemed more confident and settled, as if he'd found his footing after the disruption of his breakup with Sophia. "I'm nervous about starting Monday," he admitted as we waited for our meals to arrive. "It's been a long time since I've been the least experienced person in a professional setting." "That feeling never completely goes away," I told him. "Every new rotation, every new responsibility brings its own learning curve. But you'll adapt quickly if you stay humble and ask questions when you need help." Tyler nodded, apparently reassured by my confidence in his abilities. "I appreciate your perspective on all this. Having someone who understands the culture at Mayo makes the transition feel less overwhelming." As we talked throughout dinner, I was struck by how natural our conversation felt, despite the years that had passed since we'd spent significant time together. Tyler had developed better listening skills and more thoughtful responses to complex topics. I found myself genuinely enjoying his company rather than simply being polite for old time's sake. "Can I ask you something personal?" Tyler said as we finished our meal. "Do you think there's any chance we could explore something more than friendship? Or am I hoping for something that's impossible given our history?" His question was direct, but not pressuring, asked in a way that indicated he would accept whatever answer I gave without argument or manipulation. The honesty was refreshing and suggested genuine respect for my autonomy in making such decisions. Considered his question carefully, weighing my current feelings against the lessons I'd learned from our past relationship and my own growth since then. Tyler had demonstrated significant personal development, but rebuilding romantic trust would require time and consistent behavior rather than good intentions alone. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I'm open to the possibility, but I think we'd need to take things very slowly. We've both changed a lot, and I'd want to be sure we're compatible as the people we are now, not just nostalgic for who we used to be." Tyler smiled, apparently pleased that I hadn't rejected the possibility entirely. "That makes perfect sense. I'd rather build something real than rush into something that might not work out." His response demonstrated exactly the kind of patience and thoughtfulness I would need to see consistently before considering a romantic relationship. More importantly, it suggested he understood that any future we might build would need to be based on our current selves rather than memories of our younger connection. As we left the restaurant that evening, I felt cautiously optimistic about the next phase of both our careers and our relationship. Tyler would begin his fellowship with my friendship and support, while I would start my attending position with an interesting personal situation to navigate alongside my professional responsibilities. The complexity felt manageable rather than overwhelming, a challenge that might contribute to my growth rather than threaten my stability. I had learned to trust my own judgment and establish appropriate boundaries, skills that would serve me well regardless of how my relationship with Tyler developed. More importantly, I recognized that I was no longer the same person who had been devastated by his betrayal 8 years earlier. The pain of that experience had contributed to personal growth that ultimately made me stronger, more self-aware, and better equipped to build healthy relationships based on mutual respect rather than need or fear. Whatever happened between Tyler and me in the coming months would unfold from a position of strength rather than vulnerability, a foundation that offered the best possible chance for genuine happiness, regardless of the specific outcome. Tyler's fellowship at Mayo Clinic progressed smoothly throughout his first year. We maintained our careful friendship, occasionally meeting for coffee between our demanding schedules. He was proving himself capable in sports medicine, while I had transitioned successfully to my role as an attending cardiothoracic surgeon. During this period, I received an invitation that would change everything. The Blackstone Foundation, one of Chicago's most prestigious philanthropic organizations, was hosting their annual medical research gala. As a rising surgeon with publications in cardiac innovation, I was invited to present my work on minimally invasive valve repair techniques. Alexander, Blackstone, the foundation's heir and CEO, was known for his commitment to advancing medical research. His family's wealth came from technology investments, but Alexander had dedicated his life to funding breakthrough medical treatments. At 32, he was considered one of Chicago's most eligible bachelors, though he kept his personal life remarkably private. The gala was held at the Palmer House Hilton, attracting the city's medical elite and major philanthropists. I presented my research to an engaged audience, fielding questions from distinguished physicians and potential research funders. After my presentation, Alexander approached me personally. "Dr. Richardson," he said, extending his hand, "your work on valve repair is remarkable. I'd like to discuss potential funding opportunities for expanding your research." Alexander was tall with dark hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to assess everything with careful consideration. Unlike many wealthy benefactors I'd met, he asked technically sophisticated questions that revealed genuine understanding of cardiac surgery principles. "Would you consider joining me for dinner next week?" he asked after our lengthy conversation about surgical techniques. "I'd like to explore how the Blackstone Foundation might support your work." What began as a professional dinner evolved into something deeper. Alexander was brilliant, thoughtful, and surprisingly down-to-earth despite his immense wealth. He had attended Harvard Medical School before deciding his talents were better suited to funding research rather than practicing medicine. Our relationship developed over months of dinners, cultural events, and long conversations about medicine, philanthropy, and our shared vision for improving patient care. Alexander was unlike anyone I'd dated. His intelligence matched mine, but he also possessed emotional depth and genuine kindness. When Alexander proposed after 18 months together, he did so during a quiet evening at his penthouse apartment, overlooking Lake Michigan. The ring was stunning but tasteful, reflecting his understanding of my preferences. "Maya," he said, kneeling beside the window where city lights sparkled below us, "you've shown me what partnership truly means. Will you marry me?" Our wedding was elegant but intimate, held at the Chicago Botanic Garden with close friends and family. My parents were impressed beyond words by Alexander's wealth and status, while Tyler, who had become a valued friend again, offered genuine congratulations on my happiness. The morning of our reception, held at the Blackstone Foundation headquarters, I prepared carefully for an evening that would introduce me to Chicago's social elite as Alexander's wife. The venue was magnificent, with floor-to-ceiling windows and marble throughout. As guests arrived for cocktails, I noticed my parents near the entrance, looking somewhat overwhelmed by the grandeur but proud of their daughter's achievement. I was greeting donors and medical colleagues when the room seemed to shift. Near the champagne fountain stood Sophia, looking as beautiful as ever but somehow diminished. She wore an elegant black dress that couldn't quite disguise how thin she'd become. Her eyes searched the room until they found mine, then moved to Alexander beside me. The color drained from her face completely. The champagne flute in her hand began to tremble before slipping from her fingers entirely, shattering against the marble floor with a crash that echoed through the reception area. Conversations paused as heads turned toward the sound. Sophia stood frozen, staring at Alexander with an expression of complete shock and something that looked like fear. "Do you know her?" I whispered to Alexander, confusion mounting as I watched Sophia's reaction. "We need to talk privately," Alexander replied quietly, his jaw tense with an emotion I'd never seen from him before. "But not here." As staff members cleaned the broken glass, Sophia seemed to recover her composure enough to approach us. Her face was pale, but she managed a brittle smile. "Maya," she said, her voice slightly unsteady. "Congratulations on your marriage. I had no idea." She couldn't finish the sentence, her eyes darting between Alexander and me as if trying to solve an impossible equation. "Sophia Richardson," Alexander said, his tone cool and professional. "It's been a long time." The formal way he spoke her name sent chills through me. This wasn't a casual recognition. There was history here, complex and apparently unpleasant. "You two know each other?" I asked, though their interaction made the answer obvious. "We met several years ago," Alexander replied carefully, "during a difficult period in both our lives." Sophia laughed, but the sound held no humor. "A difficult period. That's one way to describe it." Before either could elaborate, Tyler appeared at my elbow, having noticed the commotion from across the room. When he saw Sophia, his expression grew concerned. "Sophia? What are you doing here?" "I was invited," she said defensively, though her presence at a medical research gala seemed unlikely given her background. I'm working for the catering company tonight." The admission hung in the air awkwardly. Sophia, who had once been the golden child destined for social success, was now working service jobs at events she had once attended as a guest. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation elsewhere," Alexander suggested, guiding me toward a private office adjacent to the reception hall. Tyler and Sophia followed, the four of us moving away from curious guests. In the quiet office, Alexander closed the door and turned to face us all. His expression was serious but not unkind as he looked at Sophia. "I think I owe everyone an explanation," he began. "Sophia and I were involved 4 years ago, shortly after her relationship with Tyler ended." My heart began racing as implications became clear. "How is it involved?" "We dated for about 8 months, Alexander continued. "It was serious. Enough that we discussed marriage." Sophia's face crumpled as if the memory was physically painful. "Until you discovered who I really was," she said bitterly. Alexander's expression remained compassionate but firm. "I discovered that you had a pattern of betraying people who trusted you, specifically that you had stolen your sister's boyfriend and destroyed family relationships through manipulation and lies." The room fell silent as his words sank in. Alexander had ended their relationship not because of anything between them, but because he had learned about her betrayal of me. "I couldn't build a future with someone capable of that level of cruelty toward family," Alexander explained, looking at me with gentle eyes. "Character matters more than compatibility." Sophia began crying, years of consequences finally catching up with her. "I lost everything," she whispered. "Tyler left me for someone else." Alexander left me because of what I'd done to you, and I've spent years working dead-end jobs while watching everyone else succeed. For the first time in our complicated relationship, I felt genuine pity for my sister. Her choices had indeed cost her everything, but they were still her choices. "I'm sorry you're struggling," I said honestly, "but the consequences of our actions are ultimately our responsibility." Tyler, who had been listening silently, finally spoke. "Sophia, I hope you can find a way to build something positive from here. But Maya's right. We all have to live with our choices." Alexander moved closer to me, taking my hand. "I want you to know that meeting you had nothing to do with Sophia or our past. When I saw your research presentation, I was struck by your brilliance and dedication. Learning about your character only confirmed what I already felt." As we returned to our reception, I reflected on the strange circle of connections that had brought us to this moment. Sophia's betrayal had initially seemed like the end of my world, but it had ultimately led me to become someone worthy of genuine love and respect. The evening continued successfully, with guests none the wiser about the family drama that had unfolded privately. As Alexander and I danced together, I realized that sometimes the most painful experiences create the foundation for our greatest happiness. Sophia left quietly before the reception ended. I never saw her again, though I heard she eventually found stability working for a nonprofit organization in another city. Tyler and I remained friends, both of us having learned valuable lessons about trust, character, and the importance of choosing partners who share our deepest values. My marriage to Alexander has been everything I never knew I wanted. A partnership built on mutual respect, shared goals, and the kind of love that grows stronger through challenges rather than weaker. Sometimes the worst betrayals redirect us toward our best destiny. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.